everybody. Welcome back. I'm Hillary Raimo, the goddess, priestess, the woman shaman. Who are they? Do they still exist today? Find out this next hour with my very special guest, Max Dashu. Max has founded the Suppressed Histories Archives back in 1970 to research and document women's histories from an international perspective. She is known for her expertise on ancient female iconography in world archaeology, goddess traditions, and women shamans. She has also done extensive research on mother right cultures and the origins of domination. Tonight she joins me to talk about female spheres of power and a whole bunch of other great things. Welcome, Max.
Thank you, Hillary. Great to be on.
Well, I'm really excited because I know this hour is going to go by very, very quickly because you have so much incredible information to share. And I wanted to give listeners your website while they're listening so they can check out some of the incredible images that you have spent your life work collecting from around the world. So for those of you listening, you can go to www.suppressedhistories.net and you can view some of the things we'll be talking about tonight. And Max also has an incredible amount of YouTube videos, not only on her website, but on YouTube itself, where she talks about some extraordinary histories and things that really will help enrich your understanding of our topic tonight. So, Max, let's start with why you named your website Suppressed Histories.
Well, I had been doing research for several years looking back into women's cultural legacies. I basically wanted to see where the free women were, where we could find female freedom, female honor and creativity, and female presence in the historical memory. And so the first name I came up with was the Matriarch Archives. And then I decided that it needed to be broader than that because I'm also talking about women in societies that aren't egalitarian. I mean, there are outstanding women, look at us, in really patriarchal cultures. And so I wanted to make it beyond just that one subject of the mother right cultures. So Suppressed Histories seemed like the right name because the more research I did, I mean, first when I began, I could hardly find anything. And, it was really, really hidden and squirreled away. And so that was my personal experience. But the more research I did, I found that a lot of this information was actively being kept away. That only specialist scholars in really recondite fields knew about a lot of the really exciting goddess images or the examples of female leadership in Aboriginal societies, and this is not something that was being widely shared, not in our textbooks, not in the mass media, and not in most of the conduits for information in the society. And so to me that was suppression. And it could happen in a variety of ways. It could happen through simply being left out, or it could happen through indirectly skewing the interpretation of the information to either make it look bad or to misrepresent it in some way, to distort it. And so that just seemed like the most all-encompassing word that I could come up with to describe how our concept of the human historical and cultural experience has been skewed by information not being able to come through. And not only knowledge, word forms of knowledge, but images, which is what I work with.
And what is your opinion on why this information was so elite? It was so unavailable for the general population?
Well, there's a variety of reasons. One is that it is threatening for people who believe that men should be the dominant group at all times, or that whites should be the dominant group, or that, that whites are innately superior, or that men are innately superior. So there's a lot of ideologies that are active in what we could call classical Western civilization. Then there's the religious stuff, which is related to what I just said, but it has to do with the idea that there's what you could call supersessionism, the idea that the dominant religions today are better than the older religions, and so they just naturally displaced that which preceded them, displaced the Aboriginal or the female-centered religions. And so that doctrine, and I would call it, it's a dogma, is something that the only way it can really be sustained is by actively keeping other kinds of information away from people. Because if they were to get a true and respectful portrayal of say, North American Indian religion, or you could just name dozens and thousands, really, of examples, or of the old goddess traditions, then people would go, well, wait a minute, this looks pretty good. This actually these ways have a lot to teach us. They have something to say about, human beings, that, in our essence, what would men be like if they did not get raised in a culture that taught them to think that they were better than women, or that they can even get away with violence against women. There are societies, there have been societies that look like that. So if the gatekeepers of our information have agendas, and I believe they do, then the agenda of keeping things the way they are, the social order in the form that it's in, they need to make women believe that they have always been under men. They need to make people of color feel like somehow their culture was not as rich or as knowledgeable as the dominant European societies. And so history becomes a system of control. The interpretation of religion also serves certain kinds of systems of control. And so there's a politics to this. There's a politics to culture, and there's a politics even to spirituality as far as what is allowed to come through and what interests does it threaten. For example, if you're looking at shamans, where a shaman has direct personal contact with the divine, no intermediary. And so the knowledge can come through, there can be prophecy, there can be healing, there's all these different things. Weather making, that they can bring the rains or whatever the community needs. But states and warlords and battering husbands, and you can think of all kinds of dominant groups in societies that are oppressive, are threatened by that kind of power because it actually undermines the total control that they would like to have. And so there has been persecution. That's why we've had to, in the last half century especially, create a kind of a movement to recover these psychic technologies and these other ways of being and thinking, because there has been a concerted effort to drive it down and to portray it as devil worship or whatever.
I love the fact that you brought that up, because the psychic technologies, do you feel that that women have a way of teaching this to other women and also to men? Do you feel that this is an important component of higher consciousness and communication between the ethers and the rest of the living things on this planet?
Well, yes, and it's like, a lot of what's happened is it's become so mystified. This is something that we have in our nature. These are capacities we all have in greater or lesser measure. Just like some people are great basketball players, some people are really wonderful seers or dreamers, and other people have the ability to lay on hands, and there's all these kinds of gifts. And some of the people who are languishing in our society, like maybe some of these autistic or ADD kids that are running around, nobody knows what to do with them, we're living in very unnatural ways. And so to tell a child like that they have to sit still for 8 hours, it's just not going to happen. And that child may have gifts that could benefit the entire community, but they're being forced to function in ways, and they don't have access to the shamanic healers. I just watched The Horse Boy the other night about the autistic boy that got taken to be healed by shamans in Mongolia. And, the first shaman that worked on him, he had not been toilet trained, this kid. And immediately he began, that should change right there, one treatment. So there's a lot of capacities that we all have, but the problem is if a culture is specifically geared toward really linear ways of thinking and to valorize that, right, and even to enforce it, really to enforce it. Look what happens to left-handed people, right? They got to change. Not so much now, but when I was growing up, you had to change. And so there are all these assumptions about what humans are, how we should be. And so that really gets in the way of developing those kinds of spiritual gifts. that are out there.
It's really an incredible thought. It's an incredible thing to think, about how little of reality we really are in touch with, I believe, in the society we live in today. And if I want to just remind listeners who are just joining us that I'm speaking with Max Dashu, and you can follow along with us on her website, suppressedhistories.net. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, she has some really incredible images and posters that she has available of different goddess figures and the vulva stones and lots of really beautiful images. And not to change the subject, Max, but I wanted to also mention to you that after viewing that poster, it was amazing to me how many of these goddess icons have been found in places we have never heard of before. Like, for example, across the United States, and you have pictures on your website at suppressedhistories.net of icons being pulled out from, Georgia, different states around the whole continent here. And it's really amazing because I still just can't get over the fact that we weren't taught this. And I've traveled extensively in my life, and I've seen a lot of really incredible places. And there is probably 90% of that stuff on your website I've never seen.
Well, that's why I'm calling it Suppressed Histories, because once I go and dig in there, when I began, I thought, you know what? They've destroyed it. This stuff has all been destroyed because it threatened, it threatened patriarchy, it threatened empire, whatever, and they just burned it all, or they smashed it. And it's been amazing to me in the 40 years I've been doing this to discover how much has remained. It's just that it's hidden. It's languishing in the drawer of a museum somewhere, or whatever. And it's not just women, it's all these ethnicities, all these Aboriginal peoples who you never are going to read about them in any textbook or most history books. You're just not going to, and it's those places that you have never heard about that are often the most interesting when it comes to female power.
Do you think that our history, our entire history, is we got it wrong for the most part?
It's skewed.
Mm-hmm.
It's skewed. It's just there's like I'm saying, there's a lot of places that are left out. And then even if you look at, for example, American history from the standpoint of the Indian people that were here first, it looks very different. They were basically being overrun by European invasions. And these mobs of people are coming and just pouring across the continent and taking their land. And it wasn't just the war part of it, was the whole ethos was so different because, the Europeans thought you could get somebody to put a mark on a piece of paper, and that meant, okay, now your land in perpetuity has been transferred to me. And this is not, that kind of predation was something that was inconceivable to the Aboriginal North Americans because they had never experienced anything on that scale. Really,
do you feel that the Inquisition that happened to women across, to healers across the continents of Europe and so on and so forth, were part of this kind of cleansing, if you will, of getting rid of this connection, this Earth Mother connection?
Yeah. We're talking about that right now in the Women Shaman course that I'm teaching, and just about how the witch persecutions, not only the Inquisition, but before the Inquisition, that officially gets started in the early 1200s. But before that, you had the bishops fighting a cultural war against the ethnic religions, basically, the folk religions of Europe. And so, the Italians, the Germans, the Celts, the Spanish, Scandinavians, all these different ethnicities have their own traditions. There were sweat lodges in Europe, and people don't know this now, but the ancient Czechs had sweat lodges. In Russian, the word for the sweat house was bozhina. It's from the same root as the words for God and goddess in Slavic. So the sweat house was a holy place in Europe, just like it was in North America. Not maybe exactly the same way, but it was held as that. And even the sauna, there were sauna chants in Finland where they were invoking old woman Kave. And there were ceremonies that Maria Gimbutas talks about in Lithuania where births would happen in the sauna. And there were the goddess Laima, the fate goddess. Women would come there and they would do chants to her in the sweat house. So these are aspects. The thing about what happened, the cultural repression that happened by church and state, both, not only the church but the state as well, in Europe was something that really caused a very massive cultural shift that made Europe less like the rest of the planet. Because up until that time, we had the drum, we had the sweat house, we had shamanic rites, we had incantation and sacral movement. All of this stuff was there. And I'm not over-idealizing Europe in saying this, because I would say that even before Christianity, most of those societies were patriarchal. They were Indo-European societies. But I think we have to take a really complex view. I mean, the reality is complex. And so there's a lot of factors to be looked at, but it's very clear that there was this major shift that happened in the early Middle Ages, where for the first time you had the state allying with a religious body and saying there's only one legal religion. And these guys over here, all men, are the arbiters of what that is and how it's to be done. Mm-hmm. And then enforcing that on the population. Right?
So now, when we look at our culture today, Max, what do you see in terms of this rebirthing of feminine consciousness? Are women waking up around the world? Are we about to see a rediscovery of our ancient ties to this work?
I think we are seeing it. I mean, there's this massive change, and at this point, you know, I used to think, well, it's the pagans who are really going to make it all happen. But, you know, what's happened is that you've got women in the Jewish tradition, in the Christian tradition, the Hindu tradition, you know, Buddhism, there's even in the dominant, massive global religions that are the most numerous, the majoritarian, I guess you could call them, religions, you have women going, wait a minute, these old patriarchal laws don't serve us. In fact, they never did, but they are gathering a massive amount of, I mean, they're unifying with each other, and they're saying, well, you know what about, there's nuns who are saying the rosary and incorporating the Venus of Willendorf in their Stations of the Cross. I mean, they're starting to reincorporate nature veneration as part of their image of the divine. And so this is a huge shift, and another thing that's going along with this is that there's been things like the Vatican sex scandals, you know, all of the child rape that was going on in secret by priests has been laid open. And so you've got countries like Ireland, which was deeply, deeply and loyally Catholic. Suddenly the churches are emptying out because people are going, wait a minute, this is so fundamentally corrupt, we can't deal with this. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're still not Catholic. I mean, there's cultural aspects to that they want, and especially, you know, with the Irish or the Italians or the Spanish, Our Lady, right? Our Lady, which is the form of goddess that has basically been swallowed by Christianity, and so that's still a living thing, but really being fed up with the corruption and the hierarchy of the church, the authoritarian quality of the way that the priesthood has been organized, and the exclusively masculine priesthood has pretty much shown this is the dead end of where you go with that, is that when all is said and done, they protect their own, even if they're violating children. So I think that women are looking around, and it's not only women, men are looking around. I'm seeing an amazing African-American goddess movement exploding on Facebook. There's all these amazing things that are happening. And American Indian people are talking about, well, our old traditions were matriarchal, you know, before the conquest, and we have to look at how the shifts have happened since the time of the conquest in the ways that we have been influenced by patriarchal colonizers, basically. And so there's all of these shifts in consciousness that are going on, and it's like not really a moment too soon. As far as I can see,
and I think people are feeling it in a variety of different ways. One of the most common things I observe, or what gets brought to my attention too when this topic comes up, is why are women so afraid to take their power?
You know, I take that back to the legacy of the witch hunts. Because we have a really long history of divide and conquer, and women, not only just men attacking women, but women being taught to attack other women. And really quickly rushing over to the side of the powerful and saying, I'm with them, or I'm with him, you know? And so we have certain kinds of behaviors that really need to be looked at, because I think that there's this kind of fear that goes extremely deep. into mother to daughter, all the way down of feeling unsafe, feeling fundamentally insecure at core, as a being, as a female being, that the world is not a safe place, not only because of sexual assault, but because your whole reality is shaped outside you. You know, we lost our female professions during the witch hunts. So, you know, midwifery got taken over by obstetricians, and all of these things happened, and a lot of the cultural forms that we did have that women were in, I mean, you know, medicine to a large extent was in female hands in the folk cultures of Europe, and then that's something that we've seen change massively. So we live in a world, although a lot of people will look around and say, well, women, it's okay, everything's solved, we don't have a problem anymore, because we can have the jobs that men have, and we can go to the university. And I'll be the last to deny that positive changes have happened. We've gained a lot of ground. But I think it's really fooling ourselves not to look at the full picture. For example, women are now getting more degrees than men, but all of the great majority of tenured positions and of university, the top positions, are still in men's hands. So that the people who, or editorial boards, or film directors, any levels of the culture, corporate boards, where the control actually rests, it's still overwhelmingly in masculine hands. And so, you know, economically, if you take it down to just a real basic survival level, women's income and basic survival is still very often dependent on that outer world, and it hasn't changed as much as some people would like to think, as I would like to have seen it done. You know, we have a ways to go.
Yeah. And what about men? Do you find that men are intimidated by women's power, or they're not sure what to do with it? What's the other relationship to that? How do men view women, powerful women who have claimed their power and women who haven't claimed their power?
Well, I think a lot are feeling threatened by it, and others are starting to look around and say, wow, you know, we've come to, again, it's like an end game. If we keep going on like this, everything is going to be destroyed. You know, we've just come to such a degree of the dominance model having this, it's threatening everything. It's threatening nature. It's threatening positive social relations between people. It's threatening our children. Our children are kind of a mess. And so a lot of men are motivated, I think, now to see that it's got to be done a different way.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you see a woman embracing her? How does a woman who's embracing her power empower a man? What's the relationship between the two? If a woman embraces her power and steps into it, owns it, does she in fact help a man do it? Is there a give and take there?
See, I think that the question of how does she empower a man is, again, it's back to this. There's these deep cultural scripts where women have to, always be helping men. Mm-hmm. That women are the assistants of men, that women are the encouragers of men, that it's women's job to take care of men. And so that's part of the issue, part of the problem we're facing. I mean, I understand why that is being asked, because we just talked about men feeling threatened. But men are going to have to, and this is also something that's happened as this male feminist movement has come up, and there's these men that are working with the women's centers at the colleges, and they are saying, well, look, it's up to us to start opposing rape culture. It's up to us to start making a voice among other men and saying, no, it's not okay to say those things or do those things. Mm-hmm. You know, so there's a degree of responsibility that for their own spiritual sovereignty, as positive males, they have to take that up. I don't think that it's women's job. Women have really tried a lot, I would even say bent over backwards, trying to appeal to men that, you know, please understand, oh, if you only knew, and this is so important. And it didn't work out very well, in my opinion. I think that there's a level of sovereignty that women have to claim as females that we are missing, and that is our work. And just like white people had to learn to become allies to people of color around racism, men need to learn to become allies to women around patriarchy and misogyny. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way forward.
Very well said. Medicine, women in politics. You have a very interesting take on that. And I also want to remind people to follow along with us on Max's website, suppressedhistories.net. You can see the incredible images that she has on there and a whole bunch of other wonderful links, and follow along with us. Medicine, women in politics. Back in the day of women being the healers, women being having larger responsibilities within a tribal setting or within a community setting, did they play a role in politics? And how did that affect it?
They did, and not only in the olden days, but actually I'm getting ready to do a webinar called Rebel Shamans, Women Confront Empire. It's going to be on November 21st, and you can find that on the events page on my website, on the Suppress Histories website, because what I found is that there is, I mean, you could say there's a basic politics even to female sovereignty itself, just for women to have their full place in society, because globally right now patriarchy is the rule. But there's also a very pronounced pattern that I discovered when I was putting together my Women's Power first slideshow and now a DVD on that, my first movie. What was this pattern of either medicine women or prophetesses or diviners or some kind of shamanic women. Over and over again, I found that they were leading either revolutions against colonization that had already happened or were leading resistance against conquest. And that pattern jumped out so strongly. I just kind of went, wow, look at this, because that's one of the spiritual realm is a major sphere of power for women. So that's one. And then given that, if you've got a society that's being conquered by a militarized imperial outsider, foreigners coming in, with these big, mostly masculine armies and saying, okay, we're going to take your land, right? Then in so many cases in California, in Mexico, in various parts of Africa, you find that it's the medicine women, the Babaylans in the Philippines, even sometimes some Buddhist shamans in China fighting against the dynastic rule in China. They were mobilizing people to lead, which were in many cases a fight for their life as a people, for their land. And so this is a really dramatic pattern. And it's just really quite striking. There's a woman, for example, just to get out of the abstract, in Zimbabwe, in the Shona people. The Shona had a line of lion oracles. So these are prophets with a lion spirit that inspired them. And in the late 1800s, when Cecil Rhodes was leading mercenary armies to colonize Zimbabwe, this one lion oracle who was named Nehanda Nyakasikana. Nehanda is the title for the lion oracles, and that was her full name. She led the revolution against the Rhodesians that were coming in to make a white state out of their country. And so there were these battles, and the British actually lost on some of the early battles, but then they came back with machine guns, which were a new invention at that time, and with dynamite. And so they were like causing such massive mortality that finally the Nehanda said, look, the Shona are going to be decimated by this. I'm going to surrender just to put an end to it, because they realized they could not fight on a military level. And so she gave herself up, and the British hanged her for sedition, which is crazy. I mean, It wasn't sedition. She was a matriot fighting for her country. But that's an example, just one out of, I have 50, 60 different examples in the webinar about women. And I would put Joan of Arc in that category. That's to take a better known to most Westerners figure, because she was from kind of a backwoodsy area of France, and the English had been fighting the 100 Years' War against the country and devastating it. And so she rose up as this prophetic figure, and it was just amazing. And she was accused very early on of being a witch, even long before she was burned at the stake. In order to even let her get near the king, she had to undergo a virginity exam to make sure she was not a witch, because she had sex with the devil, which witches were supposed to have done according to the demonologists of the day. Then she was, they were going to burn her at stake right then. But no, she passed muster, and she was able to inspire everybody around her. And even though she was a peasant girl that had only just been herding sheep for her all of 17 years that she had been alive, she suddenly was able to assume command over armies, and she was a better strategist through her voices, right? There was that spiritual input to actually overthrow the English for the first time in 100 years.
Wow.
And so that was astonishing. And then the witch trial comes about because the French noblemen, the noble knights, did not like the fact that this girl, this mere girl, was doing a better job than they had and was succeeding. And so one of them actually betrayed her to the English and had her captured. And once she was in the hands of the English, then the Inquisition stepped in, and then they burned her at the stake for wearing clothes, male clothes, and for assuming command over men. That ended up being the final charges, although she was initially accused of being an idolatress for her fairy dances around the fairy tree in her home village and for various acts of supposed witchcraft. So there's a lot of examples in history of women like this, where spiritual power was, they were, you could say that they were chosen by spirit, and then they performed these really incredible acts of sacrifice, in her case and in others, in order to free their country or to attempt that. You know, there's just amazing stories there.
There's a lot of stories, and I think if you listen to even women's stories today, we have modern-day versions of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, and then we're going to go to the phone lines in a minute. We have some callers waiting to ask you questions. I'm curious what you think of the act of women against women, where the destructive aspect of mm-hmm. women misusing their power or using it to harm or using it to hurt other people. How do you view that, and what do you think we can do as women to help heal that?
That's a real important problem that you're bringing up. And I'm becoming more and more conscious of this in the last 5 years. I mean, growing up, I noticed how that was in place. As a girl and as a teen, I saw women, rushing to attack other women and then, the slathering praise on whatever guy they were around, And so that pattern, as I was saying before, I think that's really old. But I'm seeing this a lot again, and women are very, very divided. If we look at the political picture in this country, the Sarah Palins versus whatever, there's just this massive divisiveness that's happened. And so I think that we have to deal with that. We have to counter it. As far as what the solution to that is, we're going to have to somehow be able to have a reasonable discussion about rights, about justice. We have to be able to contend in some way with the patterns of violence against women. And even if we don't agree about everything, somehow I think we have, in terms of bringing the spiritual and political together, we have to find a way to be able to create coalitions, even though, the pagans and the Christians and the interfaith movement and all of these different perspectives people have, I'm not going to agree with somebody who, believes in the Quran or, I have certain political disagreements with that, but I might strategically be able to unite with them over their own attempts to get freedom for women in their community. And that's just one example. I mean, I think that we need to pull back from the destructive kind of tearing at each other that I've seen going on. I see it on Facebook and on other places, and find a way to, if somebody's doing something that's good, maybe not think about so much about the bad part of what they're doing, but to think about what they're doing that's good, and to put our emphasis on the positive. And that whatever our spiritual perspective is, we can put our shoulders behind the positive and let the disagreements fall as they may. Because very often what tends to happen is people end up arguing bitterly over stuff that might not even be the big stuff. And so what ends up happening is the big stuff falls aside because of the disagreements over other things.
The small things keep them catty, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm curious also what you feel in regards to young women growing up without nature in our culture today.
And not only women, but all kids. It breaks my heart to see the kids. I live in an urban setting myself, and I see the children, and they just have the sidewalks. They don't even have grass, much less, fields and forests to play in, or, hearing bird songs or anything like that. And it's a terrible loss for us for humanity, because this is something that's a birthright of every being, not even just humans, but every being, to have access to untrammeled nature. If you're existing entirely in a man-made world, then you're missing so much of who you are, just so much. And for me, nature is guidance. Nature is wisdom, it's nectar, it's the flow, it's the origin. It teaches us all kinds of things about ourselves and, what we need to do next and how to deal with our problems. And if you can walk on the land, it all just you can renew yourself. But if you don't have access to that, then there's a flattening of the spirit that happens, because everything for these children, everything is coming at them, is highly produced, whether it's a video game, even the internet, all of these different things, or the movies and the television that they're getting, it's all packaged to the nth degree, and it's got a whole lot of forces behind it that are commercial, if not political, in nature, that is shaping how they feel about things, and it's also shaping their desires. Very sophisticated use of symbols. That part of ourselves that's the dream self is being consciously manipulated by marketing forces in order to make people crave things and go out and buy them. Mm-hmm. So the symbolic has lost, it's being used really cynically, but it's lost some basic valence of the sacred has been dropped. It's gotten so contorted. And so that's the other part of what I think all of us have to do, is to, be able to protect nature, number one, but also to find ways to be in it and to find ways to help the youth be in it, because it's so much a shaping of your sense of self. If you don't have access to that, then it's like you've lost the well. You're basically seeking out the artificial instead of the true,
It's a big topic, and it's something we should be very worried about, I think. And as our kids grow up in an age where they really just aren't encouraged to seek out that connection, I'm curious what their children are going to be exposed to as the generations start flipping. We have a caller on the line, Jay from Alberta. Welcome, Jay. You have a question for Max?
Yes, it's a great show. I teach actually drumming courses, and pretty well 99% of my class students are actually women, and teach them to sing with their heart. And some of them is really a struggle, and some of them just go for it. And I just wondered about the power aspect, because it seems like they've been so, how to say it, they cannot see their identity in themselves, who they are. And it's really, really interesting that I see this, and it's kind of disheartening. Going like, did we as a society and men or religion or do that to women? And
I think it's an overall cultural thing at this point, and women are conditioned to hold back. Women are taught the most important thing is how you look and how you seem and how you appear to other people. And so women have much more self-censorship that comes from a patriarchal society in that way. This is a generalization, of course, but I see that.
And what about, giving all the time? It's like you work on yourself and give to yourself first and then give to others, and then usually that's how it works, isn't it?
I'm not sure I understood your point.
Well, taking care of yourself and then taking care of others, working on yourself. And you kind of have to be selfish in a way to be more powerful, but not exploited to the point where, it's all me but nobody else.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that... as women start to reclaim that sense of self, they start to make that connection to always being serving to others, but, and also now it's time to be serving to self in the way that nurtures us back into health sometimes. Don't you agree, Max? Or do you see it differently?
Yes, I think that even instead of calling it selfish, it's more that they need to become whole.
Yeah.
Because it's not selfish. Selfish is a word that there's a specific context. There are such things as selfish people, and they're like, whatever exists is there for my taking, And I don't think that there's another aspect which is more that women. It's kind of like if there was somebody who had a strong wind blowing against them all of the time, like a tree even, that had a strong wind always blowing on it, that tree would become contorted according to the force that's pushing it all the time. Mm-hmm. And so women have assumed physically, psychically, emotionally, and mentally contorted postures in reaction to the constant negative feedback they're getting from a patriarchal culture. That even if they just speak up in the name of justice, somebody is going to react to them negatively, and then the next minute some guy is going to say the same thing, and they're going to go, oh, that's brilliant, And so that kind of conditioning has an effect, and that's what I mean when you're about being whole, becoming whole, is that you have to learn to basically come back into a balanced holding of yourself or moving of yourself where you're not in a reactive position and reacting to something that you've been feeling all your life.
Very interesting. I look forward to hearing the rest of this conversation. You'll probably carry on for another show, but it's really, really interesting. So
I told you at the beginning it could go by. It's going to go by fast.
It is. So
thanks for your questions, Jay. Thanks for your questions. Welcome. Thanks for listening. Max, you are filled with an incredible wealth of information, and you share it so graciously with the rest of us. And, I really have to commend you on your work that you do, because I have looked through your website extensively and listened to your YouTube videos and seen how much passion you have in this topic. And you speak all over the place. You have anything coming up soon people can check into, or anything you'd like to tell listeners?
I'm not traveling in the next 2 months. Not until I'll be going to the LA area in mid-January. And people can write me through the website and get on the mailing list for their region if you want to be on for events. But what I am going to be doing is these webcasts. And so I mentioned the Rebel Shamans show, and that's going to be on November 21st, which is at noon Pacific. And then you have to check all your other local times. And that will be, basically, I'm giving a slideshow through my computer to your computer. And so you can look on the events page of my website and find out about how all that works. The other one that I'm going to be doing is called Ancient Treasures of African Women. And that's going to be November 28th, which is also a Sunday at noon Pacific. And so what that I'm doing with that one is bringing forward a lot of really magnificent art from not only ancient Egypt, which people are a little more familiar with. This is going to be pre-dynastic, though, so it's less familiar, very hard to find sometimes, some of this imagery. But also the Saharan rock art, the South African rock art, the Nok ceramic sculptures, and a variety of other things that are just some of the most magnificent art in the world. But looking at it in the African female archaeomythology, I guess you could call it.
There's something to be said about watching these images that you have. I had the honor of watching one of your presentations in New Mexico in October when you were speaking at the Grandmother Summit for the Sisters of Hanoa. And there's something to be said about the connection that you make consciously, through consciousness with the images. And what I like to encourage people is to take a look at these images, because it's almost like a download of information. It's almost like a correcting of that contortion that you talked about with that women, and I'm sure all people, on men and women and children, go through according to their conditioning and their culture and how their, what their experiences are, this contortion. There's something about viewing these ancient symbols, that reorganizes consciousness. When you watch a video, when you play a video game or you watch a movie today, you are bombarded with those symbols, and you're bombarded with what, the person's trying to convey, and you're being farmed into a lot of different things, like buying certain things. But when you look at symbols that come from a very old and ancient place, it changes you. I mean, I'm sure you have had this experience. Mm-hmm. How has this shaped your own personal journey through all of this?
I mean, for me, it's a salve, and I think for women in general, it's a salve to see that there are these other kinds of images that are not coy, posed females that are like have no power in their body. They're not inhabiting their body, but instead images that are women expansive, present, fully embodied. You know, their breasts, their vulva, it's all there. You know, the vulva stones poster is the sacra vulva poster. I have some of those images you can see on the website. And for me, what I used to do, and I still do it sometimes, is to look at the images, because I had these slideshows, right? And I would play music from that part of the world, you know, and as ancient sounding of a music as I could find, and look at the images together with the music. And it gives an amazing feeling, you know, because you really feel like you're tasting that place. And there's something about viewing the images contain medicine through which we transform our conscious of who a female can be, what she can be like, what that power is like, when we've seen it in colonized forms, for the most part, over most of our lives. And so it's like a big window opens up in the wall, and this light comes streaming in, and you're going, wow. And I can't tell you how many times women have said to me, why were we never taught about this? How come we've never been shown this? And how did it come to be the way it is now? You know, those are the big questions.
They are the big questions. They are, because even men are changed by the images when they look at these images. And the images that you have spent your life work collecting are not common. I don't care who you are. I mean, I really don't think that the average person or even the more advanced scholar has access to some of these images, and the way that you have collected them and put them together so carefully is really just an amazing thing. And I can't say it enough times, you know, to people listening to go on suppresshistories.net and to view these images and to look at their posters. The posters that she has put together have compiled these images from all around the world. Max, have you traveled personally to see a lot of these places?
No, not to all those places. I've traveled only a little. This is mostly from library prospecting and just really collecting, just digging and trying to find where this stuff is. I mean, I know that if I could get into museums in Sumatra and all these other places, that I'd find amazing things. I know that, but I just have never had the budget to do that. This is really a labor of love, and it was never funded by anything other than what I could scrape together. So that's starting to change because people are discovering it, and you know, I'm starting to teach online, which is really, I'm so excited to be able to do because it funds the work.
You need to do a book. You need to do a book. And if there's anybody listening out there who can help her, you need to contact her on her website, because you really need to have a book behind you with all of this stuff, because this would be something that people would really be able to curl around them like a blanket and just, you know, like you said, a salve, and just really, you know, rest into and let it nurture you. It's very strong medicine.
Pardon me?
It's very strong medicine. These images are very strong medicine.
It's medicine. I do have a book. It's sitting in a file drawer because I just getting time to work on it has been a problem up until I taught a course on spiritual heritages of ancient Europe, which I'm going to resume in 2011. And that's basically, I have to get paid to work on the book. That's how it works. Otherwise, it sits there because I have to pay the rent. But and now I'm teaching the Woman Shaman course, and that's the next project coming out. Is there's going to be at least one DVD, maybe several, on women shamans, because I have so much material it may be too long for one movie. We'll see how that goes, but you know, that will be a way. When basically what I'm trying to do now is pour all this out so you all can have access to it, whether it's through web pages, movies, books, or whatever.
Yeah, well, your efforts are making a difference. And one of the things I'd like to discuss as we enter the last few minutes of the show is something we touched base on briefly in the beginning of the show, which is a term that you say that you call free woman. What is a free woman, and what does she look like today?
A free woman is someone who is not controlled by cultural messages, by the imperatives of those around her, who has wholeness, where she has aligned herself in, we could say earth, water, air, fire, or we could say body, soul, mind, and spirit, that those are integrated. She's an integrated being who is not reactive, but instead is coming out of her heart, out of her wholeness, and has at least some community where she can be who she is. And when she's not among that community, she's not someone, she may strategically say, I'm not going to fight this battle here today, right now, but she doesn't lose her sense of self, because she can go back and, any traumatic experiences that may happen to her, she can work them out inside herself without having to constantly be dealing with the outside world and feeling impinged upon. And she's someone whose creative power is pouring out from her, that she is engaged in whatever it is she's on this planet to do, that she's about that. And even if she's carrying a heavy load uphill for years and years at a time, she doesn't stop. She may put down her burden and catch her breath, but she's not going to give up, because that's who she is. And she's not going to ever surrender that to other people who say, you must bow down. You must come to terms with the twisted social order as it exists now. And she's a spiritual woman, and that doesn't necessarily mean that she could be an atheist and be a spiritual woman. It's just that there's a respect within her for the presence of life and consciousness that pervades all being, all the earth, all the stones and everything else. And so she sees herself in kinship, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful dream, and what a beautiful reality for women to find themselves as. In the last few minutes, we have a couple minutes left. I always ask my guests at the end of the show to offer a personal message to the listeners and to the airwaves going around the world on the internet here. What is your personal message you would like to tell humanity?
Oh, well, you surprised me with that one. I looking at how things are now, I think that it's really important to integrate our spiritual vision with political action on some way, because of what we're all facing. There's these massive economic changes. We have fascist forces that are assembling that are really playing on fear and hatred, and that needs to be opposed. I don't want to live in Germany in 1930, and the United States right now, or wherever you may find yourself. I mean, there's a lot of challenges we're facing that I think we can't only feather our own nests. We have to act on the outside world as well, and to become allies, to form coalitions, and to do that as a spiritual act. And so that the freeing of women is part of that. The elimination of racism is part of that. The human rights in general and respect for the earth and ecology, all of that is part of that. We have to find a way to marry all that together in the way we live our lives, so that justice can be in our future, and harmony and peace can be in our future and for our children.
You're listening to Max Dashu, everybody. Her website is suppressedhistories.net. Max, I want to say thank you so much. It's been such an honor to share an hour of my life with you, and I just appreciate the information that you have shared with me and my listeners, and I just want to say a deep, deep, heartfelt thank you for making time to join us today.
Thank you, Hillary. It's really been a pleasure. I enjoyed it.
So again, if you would like to find out more information, her website one more time is suppressedhistories.net. She has information on some online courses coming up, and you can find access to all these fabulous images that we've been discussing this past hour. I just want to say quickly to everybody who's joined me on the air listening to the shows, and I have enjoyed and really just wonderfully loved the emails that I have been receiving from listeners. And if there's ever somebody that you would think would be a good fit for the show, you're always welcome to submit guest ideas through to me on my email, Hillary@HillaryRaimo.com. And I just want to express a deep moment of gratitude for all of you and all the wonderful feedback that I have gotten. And thanks so much for being here too, everybody. And I love you all. And next week I will see you once more. Thanks.